think that I'm proud of the patient world building that we did in each of our shows and our ability to make vivid images.
I think I'm proud of all of the times that we strayed from the form and followed our intuition while still keeping it scary or unsettling.
For next time, I would want to work on intentionally inverting the gender tropes that we've seen in our example slasher films and not letting them seep into the slashers that we create.
For next time, I would want to work on the character of the slasher a bit more and have them maybe command some more presence while they're in scenes, while still being something of a fleshed out character.
Yeah. Julian, I felt very supported when I was playing the pickle combo character who was not really giving you anything verbally. You were able to really carry the weight there and make things still happen. And I also, upon listening during the editing, have been extremely impressed by the smoothness of your verbal narration. I feel like I want to work on that, or I'm learning from your delivery.
Thank you. Hal, I would like to thank you for a lot of the times in these shows, I think it feels like I'm either in character mode or in narrative mode. And whenever I dip into character mode, I feel like you're able to pull some of the narrative weight in a very helpful way. And also, I'm always eternally grateful to play with you because of the way that we can convey hits to each other without being extremely on the nose. There were various points throughout the shows where I was like, oh, wow, this was my hit, and I'm so glad we're on the same page, but I didn't have to say it.
Also in the pickle combo, we went a long time where both of us, I think, were very aware of where the show was going and just sort of subtly pushing it very slowly in that direction. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Muprov Musings. This is episode 64. I'm one of your hosts, Hal Munger, and joining me now on the line is your accomplished host, Julian Bernardo.
I'm glad that you've called me accomplished because when you said 64, it made me think of the thing that I'm perhaps most accomplished in, which is Minecraft. 64 is the number of items that you can have in a stack, and that's a game that I've played a lot of and I think has some nice improv potential if I'm thinking about it.
I have also been thinking about that because in the online verse, most people play in Zoom, but you could build a castle and have one person responsible for teleporting people to different rooms and then do Shakespeare prov in the Minecraft verse. And that's a pet project that I want to do at some point.
Sounds so fun. But we are not here to discuss ghasts, creepers, cows, nor Steve. We are here to discuss the amazing season that we just had of Slasher.
Yeah, our first 11 episode season. And we changed up a couple of different things. So we're going to debrief the shows that we just did. And we're also going to talk through the changes that we made because at the beginning of the season, we gave a little update saying that it was going to be different. And it may have felt similar to the viewer, but there were some crucial differences in how we approached it. And we have a very small listener base. So if you have any feedback or want the next season to follow any different course, drop us some info and let us know what you think of the changes.
Yeah.
So, Julian, I want you to start off actually talking about that because I think you were feeling a little bit of dissatisfaction going into the season and wanted to see that change represented in the real world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it came to a head, especially before this season, because this is a format that is very precious to me. I think one of the things that I was happy about going into this season is the degree to which we maybe thought through things before jumping into them. I'm actually a little less clear on what were your kind of biggest changes. And overall, I think I felt happy this season on account of doing Slasher and just being on the same page about where we're feeling. So yeah, I mean, talking more about it was helpful.
Yeah, I think that for me, one of the biggest shifts was in the previous season, primarily what we were trying to do was convey knowledge that we had to the audience. Whereas I think in this season, especially because we have such a small listening audience, our goal was to build our own knowledge and to make that a public thing. So if anyone wanted to peek in on us discovering how to do the slasher, they were welcome to, but it was less of like a here's how you do it and more of a like, how would we be able to do it if we experiment in these ways?
Yeah, and I think as a result, like we both learned a lot and like ventured into new territory for the slasher. Because instead of trying to teach exactly what we know about it, I think we had to ask ourselves questions, and then that led to answers that we maybe previously didn't have when we did this in person before.
Yeah, and I think you can see it in the shows. They were pretty different from any slasher show that I did, but that was another big shift, obviously, is that we did 3 shows, and we also did not invite outside guests on to perform in the shows, because I think the feeling was if we're trying to learn something on the podcast, we want to do the shows with people who are doing this new thing that we're building, rather than reaching out to people who had done the same thing as us in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was a lot of fun. I mean, I'm eager to get into the specifics of these shows. I do think that like one thing that was nice about doing multiple shows is I don't know how much we've talked about this like theory, but like the like probability or proportions theory of improv that we talk about sometimes of you're not necessarily practicing for one show or to do a show in one way. Like the way that you practice some sort of format might involve, oh, like 30% of our show should be like this, 60% should be like this. I think that once we did multiple shows, we were able to like get different looks at the format in a way that informed us about like, I'm getting a little lost here, but yeah, I think that it's very helpful to see different shapes of the format.
And for that, I think full honesty, we actually recorded Azurite before we recorded Carousel. So if you want to know the full trajectory, it's Azurite, Carousel, then Pickle Combo. But we put Carousel first because it felt a little more violent and slashery, and we wanted to start out in that mode. But let's talk through the progression just as a very brief reminder. We had our tiny little mini Gigaspine that we did in the first episode that was all about chess. I think that was maybe episode 5.
Yeah.
And then we had our Gigaspine, which took place in a comedy club. And I would say followed a very standard slasher structure where we followed a protagonist. Of all the shows, that was the most standard structure because we were able to sort of talk through it. Anything there that you felt like you learned or would change from that show, wished for?
I liked, just as you say, I think it was the most like faithful adaptation or just instantiation of the slasher, and it was helpful to be able to have that just to see just to see what it looks like, because I don't even think in the times that we've improvised like in person that it's been as like by the books as that show was. I quite liked that show for a few reasons, and I thought that might have been one of our stronger like protagonist shows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if you want to actually learn how to do the format in a reliable way, that's probably the most useful one to look at. And that one had one of my classic, like after the thing, like, oh, there's the Tsuji. For those of you who haven't listened to our Tsuji episode, it's the sort of like perfect move that you can do towards the end. And I edited it into the pod thing, but I think just a little clip of me saying, oh, this would have been great. But when we were wondering what was making her laugh so much in the forest at the end, having it be the squirrel or the chipmunk jump out, because we did say that there was this chipmunk. That's just an easy thing to make her laugh at the end.
Yeah.
So missed that Tsuji, but it's okay. Sometimes even when you're taking your time, you miss the Tsujis, and you don't need to hit every Tsuji in improv.
And if you miss them, then you are coming back with a vengeance next time, and you're looking hard for them.
But let's get into our actual shows. So let's do them in the order that we improvise them. So let's go to Azurite next.
Yeah. Azurite, Azurite was, I mean, let's, I guess, basically describe the plot a little bit before getting into our opinions on it. We were following, like, mainly, I forget her name,
Ash.
but Ash, a high schooler who was like lampooned by her town for being a witch, which at the beginning was maybe thought to be untrue, but by the end definitely like came to some fruition. I think yeah, we had big party scene with a lot of deaths. We had kind of possession with these like blue magical rocks. I think that in terms of setting, it was very slasher in terms of a lot of like dumb high schoolers basically being the fodder.
Um, yeah, and I loved Azurite. I did feel like it didn't feel quite as slasher, and that was part of why we bumped it back to the second episode. I think partly because there was no blood.
Mm.
And also because there wasn't really one slasher. There was more of this sort of stone that had kind of unclear powers. It could surround you, it could possess you. There were I don't think we did a good job of defining what exactly every person's power was.
Yeah. Yeah, I think ideally maybe there would have been like one or two, I don't know about like flashback or cutaways or some sort of explanation of the like how Ash is related to these stones, like what power she has over them. I think that like a lot of the scenes that we had were nice like set pieces for a slasher. I particularly liked the one in the room with the like the boyfriend and the other girl at the party. The I think it was the first one where the boyfriend is sort of acting possessed. I thought that that was a great and creepy scene.
Yeah, and the one with the brother, I think, was also very, very memorable. But ultimately, I think that because so much of that came in the second half, uh, the tone of it felt very placid and calm and slow and quiet, kind of like a lake. Um, and I think that's also contributed to not really feeling like a slasher. All three of our shows actually had a kind of slow opening. Um, and I think that for next time, I would want to focus on speeding up that opening or at least putting in more tension into each of those scenes. Get the information out quickly and get the tension there.
I feel like we could have I don't maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like we could have had more like false scares towards the beginning to keep some tension early on.
Mm-hmm.
Uh yeah, I think that would be like a nice tool because I think that there's some necessary like plot setting that we were doing there, but yeah, a little scary would be good.
Yeah, it kind of, I was very happy tonal or texturally that it reminded me of Housekeeping, which is my favorite book.
Mm.
The cold lake vibes, and also it sort of felt in moments like a Studio Ghibli movie, just with the bicycle going along the cliff and this
Mm.
sort of quiet narration of the town. So that, and then at the end, it felt like Julian was doing some sort of Avatar thing where the Fire Lord Sozin's getting pulled back and turning into a beam of light. So it related to a lot of pieces of media that I like that aren't slashers, but that texturally I had never seen in improv before.
I think also we had a nice dynamic there of or I always like for setting the tense or uneasy dynamic having like some sort of somewhat problematic interpersonal relationship happening, and definitely the way that the town felt about Ash and then her relationship to like the boyfriend or guy at least was like he definitely seemed a bit he was kind of like embarrassed of her to some degree, would only meet up with her in like the forest far away. I think that that was like helpful in establishing that this is not like maybe differentiating somewhat from these more like light fantasy settings.
Mm-hmm. And that hit an apex at the end. I felt like I had learned from watching Jaws the scariness of the town, and the way that
Mm.
they thought Ash was causing the killings and pulled her off to the lake to drown her like a witch. I honestly feel like we didn't. It was so fast and crazy that we didn't quite hit the maximum potential of what could have happened in the ending. Also, because the powers weren't clearly defined, but at that moment when she was being dragged to the lake and held above the water, and when she touched it, it was steaming. It was like, what is going to happen here? And that was very crazy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think we had decent, like it's generally a hard thing to do, like having a big scene, like a big party scene with two people, because we have some tools for it, but just popping around, keeping characters consistent, that can be difficult from time to time. But I felt good about the way that we were popping in and out of various characters there.
yeah, highly recommend going to listen to it. But let's move on. Next up was Carousel, which of the three real shows that we did definitely felt the most like a normal slasher, in my opinion, in that there was one guy who was doing all of the killing, and it was like a creepy guy.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And yeah, so I mean, this is the one we have the creepy guy living in the fairgrounds tent, and the like his sponsor of sorts to the outside world, who was, I guess, like a student at the high school with these other with our protagonists. This one, yeah, I really like the setting. I think Old Fairgrounds is good, and I think, yeah, we had like one slasher. I'm trying. It starts with the death, right, of like a or just, yeah, assumed death of some kid on a carousel, right? The carousel starts spinning up real fast.
yes, and that was who would eventually be the slasher. So you kind of assumed that someone got maimed, or like this is their origin story, is the terrible carousel accident. But again, we kind of dawdled at the beginning, and I felt like pacing wise in the last half, we really were just in slasher territory, and we had a lot of unique, scary encounters in different locations, because the
Mm-hmm.
carnival was really the thing that we talked about in our tropes episode of like, if you can pick a vibrant location that has several different rooms, then you can do a different kind of kill in each of the rooms. So we had the arcade, we had the fun house, we had the roller coaster, and like there was just a lot of different places to get killed.
Yeah, that I do think that, yeah, you're right that this is very like classic slasher. I think that the opening like set up in a very similar way to a lot of other slashers, and that we had a lot of fun just picking different locations at the carousel. I think that like that is a good shape if you're trying to do a slasher, and that might be one of the most important things in keeping your shows consistent, is consistently producing at least some location that
Mhm.
has various locations for set pieces, basically, with the slasher.
And this, I think, is the first one where we hit something that to me felt sometimes scary. Uh, I don't know how scary we're ever going to be able to be in Duoprov Zoom audio, but uh, certainly the moment when the finger got bit off, I remember that kind of
Mm.
viscerally. And the final image, the moment when the slasher had the arm of the girl that he killed in his mouth, and he was below the fog in the funhouse, and the main guy was holding on to that arm,
Yeah.
thinking that he was holding on to. I was like, ugh, that was it. Just these visceral images, and of course the final thing where the poor protagonist gets turned into basically a glorified horse for the carousel along a roller coaster. That might have been too far, Julian. I'm not sure if I can get behind that, but
Yeah, I'm trying to piece together, like, did we have a coherent plot there of like why, like especially just with the, was he the nephew of the slasher, the character who was kind of the go-between?
yeah, I think the weakest part of the whole show was that, and I think that this is why improv often suffers from vagueness. We had a scene where Jared, who was the nephew, was talking to the slasher, and it didn't really explain at all who the slasher was, or why Jared was doing his bidding, or really anything. And then later on in the show, we also kind of, it was too late. There wasn't really an answer that perfectly made sense for why everything was going on, or at least we didn't find that answer.
Yeah.
Um, so that was the weak point of the show, I think, was this kind of like, wait a second, who actually is this person?
Yeah. Uh, I think it's that's a case where, yeah, we don't want to like ruin the show by like making a bad call there, but I think it would have been better if we just made even if it's still like, I think the mystery still should be unsolved, like as early on as that scene between them happened. But it should make like very specific claims, I think, about like, oh, like I'll do this so that you don't like blank, but like even that stuff can be kept vague, but I think we were just vague in like kind of every direction that that kind of scene should have like something where by the end of it, it's obvious what they were talking about. We're just maybe leaving out some of the key nouns.
Mm-hmm. But and so kind of following this pattern, I feel like both of our first two shows were young people with a kind of slow opening into a succession of kills, with these kind of honestly similar characters of like generic high school kind of nerdy guy with a innocent female love interest, and like yeah, I think that was the part that I was feeling like I wanted to shake up a bit going into the next show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in a certain sense we kind of recreated some of the stuff that we watched a little too well, and that yeah, I think that those are very slasher tropes, but fact of the matter is like we're slashers, the like slasher films that are being made today are not exactly following those tropes because they're a bit tired, or at least they're adding something more
Mm-hmm.
interesting. So yeah, I think I agree that it made the characters feel a bit flat, and I also kind of wanted to do something quite a bit different after that.
Yeah. And I think that that's the danger of doing all this kind of research. I think
Mm-hmm.
that we talk about these progression curves. Um, it's like if you can kind of over practice things in a way where eventually it'll actually really help to have done all the research and stuff like that. But immediately after, you don't want to be too shaped by what other people are doing. And that's kind of why I always love to have a mix in the Shakespeare prov. I think it's really good to have a mix of people who are really familiar with Shakespeare and a couple people who have no idea what it is, because they just add that little hint of chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. Spontaneity is like key for this. And especially when you and I are like talking a lot about what we think is good, what we think is bad, our improv thoughts about how to do this. Yeah, there's like following that conversation, maybe a lot of things that are quote unquote like determined about what the show will be. And so like anything to throw that spark in there, especially because like we're starting these shows with one word suggestions. So the audience input, aka just like randomness factor is relatively low.
Mm-hmm. And also, we haven't seen that many slashers, so each of our shows kind of influences our own idea of what a slasher is and like.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really hilarious that then in the third show we have the lake really relevant again, and we got off the turnpike, and you were like, "Oh, it's the old fairground that now is an office building." Just because you didn't, it's hard to keep your brain from repeating the things that you've already done.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I clocked that exact moment.
Um, so yeah, going into the third show, I think both of us had the desire just to mess around and really lock in with each other and play with each other. And I think we achieved that very well in Pickle Combo.
Yeah, I mean, so pickle combo. It started not too dissimilar in the we were a bit older, it seemed, but we were still like two friends, at least from high school, in a small town who were back and seeing people. But it takes this great turn where we kill, I think, James at the drive through, and we get really obsessed with this pickle juice, leading to like our characters being kind of the slashers for the show. It was very, very fun to do this. I was very delighted at the fact that even just being slashers alone would have maybe carried my intrigue in my brain enough for the whole show. But at the office park, we got a lot of fun revelations about their past and like our relationship to Sally and stuff like that. So and then the great turn at the end of like my character had killed someone back in high school. There were many turns there that I thought were very fun.
Yeah, I thought that this was our best show by a pretty big margin, despite not following the structure at all. It's kind of like what we were talking about in the Break the Forum episode, where it can either do something really, you'll get your best shows and your worst shows, and totally could have been our worst show. Like,
Mhm.
if we had just spent the whole show ordering like more and more goofy pickle sandwiches, like it just had such potential to be a utter train wreck. But I think if you don't worry about that, just the being in the right headspace at the end of this run and just being like, we want to have fun regardless of what happens, we're going to make it work, was what allowed us to put all those fun and interesting twists in. And the vivid imagery again,
Mhm.
that pale little guy, with his little baby form, just saying pickle combo with his pickle combo all over his skin in the room full of menus, was just like, what the hell?
I think this one also had the strongest like theming. Like it was like kind of clearly something like an alcohol allegory or something. As compared to the others, I think that this one felt like, yeah, it was just about something.
Yeah, we had talked about how to do that in a previous episode, of like take something that actually is wrong with the world. And I like the fact that this character like never drank at all in high school, and then by drinking pickle juice was going like absolutely berserk. Yeah, I think that it was pretty clearly alcohol as this potential killer.
Yeah, and that's like revealed like especially with like the like it was like a assumedly like a drunk driving sort of thing that my character had done to the other to the person who had died in high school. Flashbacks were fun. What like going forward, what are your broad thoughts about these kinds of shows, like slasher shows where protagonists are basically the slasher and we're like following them?
I loved it. I mean, Cameron was talking about a long time ago doing the anti-hero's journey
Mhm.
as a reaction to the hero's journey, and this felt very similar to that to me. Of you're kind of following this person who is becoming corrupted, and
Mhm.
I think that I think it actually lends itself to a lot more depth as a
Mhm.
format than the other thing does.
Yeah, I don't doubt that. I mean, it's yeah, the other thing is so yeah, it can be so formulaic and like the key character who is making all of the action happen is the slasher. And so like getting the closest look as possible, aka, following this character throughout the whole show might be the best way to motivate something like that happening.
Yeah, so I don't know if we'll ever explore that as a format where that that's what's going to be happening. Perhaps that would take the life out of it. But it puts emotional resonance into all of the kills. And it also fit into all three of well, no, I guess two of our shows had this thing where there was a slasher killing people, but there were also people just sort of dying through other reasons, or these kind of secondary slashers. So you had the crystal slashing, and you also had the boyfriend slashing in Azurite, and then in this you had both of the two openers did some murdering at various points.
Yeah. The I think we had a nice even though it broke the form in a lot of ways, I think that the end felt pretty slasher. Of like driving away and being followed. Obviously the perspective is a little bit different, but I think that we hit that nice tense like final act of like something is happening. They're driving really quickly to yeah, the lake again, and obviously we it's at this point where we know that something is up with the lake. Someone had died at the lake before, so maybe something similar will happen with him now, but there's enough of a turn, I think, that it still stays satisfying.
Yeah, I would love to see this made into a movie someday. Just the very final beat underneath in the water, when the pickle combo guy was fully just in baby mode, like sucking his thumb and like just in the back of the sunken car. And then when she swam down and broke the window, it was like and buckled her soul. That was in my opinion, the best scene of the whole run. Of just a very memorable image that we made.
I totally buy. And leading up to that, just the scene of the car chase, it really actually reminds me of if anybody's seen The Conjuring, the like final act of The Conjuring, spoiler alert, where they figure out that it's like the mom who's going to be possessed now. It's the very same kind of thing where the final like kind of plot turn is given. We know that the twist is there, and like that informs, oh, maybe the slasher is going to do something like devious with this person, which in our case was like my character with the baby pickle character, and there's just like fast paced like let's get there to end it moments. That was very similar in my head.
And I liked that the the female member of the trio, I forget her name, but that she became actually the scary person in that final sequence.
Yeah.
There was this weird shift where suddenly she kind of had the status. And it wasn't really clear why, but she was doing the chasing. And I felt like, despite the fact that nominally she was kind of this love interest character, that there was suddenly this depth to her. And I felt like playing her, I suddenly felt like she was actually almost the most fleshed out character of all of the ones that we had in that show.
Yeah, I think that like the two like initial protagonists were like largely spent at that point, and that like it felt like a lot of the narrative power and interest went to her because she was basically the third member of the trio who we still kind of had questions about, and those questions are maybe answered somewhat in the end. It's enough of like a question mark on that to keep it feeling suspenseful and unsettling.
I'm really happy with that one. If you haven't seen that one, and if you're going to listen to one of them, I would definitely listen to Pickle Combo. But yeah, I think that leads well into the gender thing of I do think that we kind of missed on that this season, and it's tricky because I feel like one of the ways we usually invert gender tropes is by queering a lot of characters, and like in the slasher setup, I feel like there is such an existing trope in the real world of like queer people getting murdered that wasn't really where I wanted to go with these shows. So I think that they ended up feeling kind of more straighter and more gender normative than what otherwise might have been the case.
Yeah, I mean, what would be some of your ideas for like ways to perturb this going forward?
Yeah, it's tricky because I think that also with the slasher, like there's so much like transphobia and general like there are so many portrayals of villains who are queer that I don't know. It's hard. I kind of liked that about the stand-up comedy one, in that there it was kind of this campy like killing of these people that you didn't like, those people were being offensive and they were being killed for that. But I think it's a tricky genre, and I think that maybe you just lean into it and just are okay with what happens. But I don't know. I would want to try to see if there's a way to complicate it. And I think the simplest thing would just be more female slashers, more male protagonists, and more powerful female characters than we had in our current runs.
Another, I think, fix that comes to mind that is maybe easier for anybody who's listening is just who you're playing with. I mean, like there's only like there's a certain way in which like Hal and I are limited in the ways that we can make the shows feel good in that way. But if we kind of had a broader cast, I think that where we're not like paying a lot of attention of like alignment of improviser gender to character gender, I think that alone is something that kind of frees it up to some degree.
Yeah, but I mean, it's what one fun thing about being in an all male cast is that I do get to play more female characters than I normally do. So this was an interesting toe dive into that, and I want to work on making them more nuanced. It's hard to communicate, obviously, that you are female without leaning into tropes.
Yeah.
because that's so much of how we convey gender in general. And if you don't lean into it, sometimes people are just like, "Oh, your character's male," and endow you with more of that stuff. So, finding the balance. But I had a lot of fun. I had a
Yeah.
lot of fun playing with gender, even if I think that we didn't do it perfectly.
I think one other thing about these shows that felt a little bit new to me and uh, was maybe particularly striking about the final show is that in some ways it did feel, and I said this at the beginning maybe of the series or at some point as like something I wanted to, but it felt like we were veering into improvised horror more generally as compared to improvised slasher. And I think that in general, I mean, horror I think encompasses slasher. Uh, and what we were doing in that show was just following our intuition about various things that might make the show feel unsettling, that might, yeah, just be scary in general. And I think that that is the path to improvised horror. There might be more obvious ways to do it in terms of like producing a consistent show, but that comes to my mind as, oh, yeah, maybe that's just how you do it. You just follow your nose about what's unsettling.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with that. And I think that part of what made it feel like improvised horror is that they also just felt more like movies than the normal improv that we do. I think often they started out feeling more like improv shows, but I
Mhm.
think the beginning of Azurite right away felt to me more like this kind of my eyes were closed, this visual scene, because we were doing so much of the description in a way that the Shakespeare Hero's Journey and super, like nothing we've done on the podcast just felt to me this movie like. It's all felt more improvised.
Yeah. One horror source that is interesting in my mind is that the pickle combo in some ways felt a little bit like a grown up like Goosebumps story, because I feel like these Goosebumps stories are often centered around some like horror object or horror, you know, amulet, horror person, horror something, and we were centered around this pickle juice, and we iterated on it. So it comes to like the format comes to mind of the suggestion at the top being like the MacGuffin, the, you know, the horror centerpiece, and then we find a way to make a horror story about that. Where and it's very it's very conceivable that we would get as a suggestion from an audience. What's something scary? Pickle juice. Uh,
Uh,
so yeah, that feels to me like a fertile ground.
yeah, I realized that was it was in my brain because someone had just been telling me about how you could use pickle brine to desalt roads. Like there was just a
Oh.
news story about that. And then you ordered the pickle thing, and I just accidentally said this pickle drink, and then it just it just veered. So we did that one to ourselves, but no sweat there. So pivoting, what do you think that are the main takeaways that we learned this time in Slasher?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like there were like two sets of lessons, like the lessons that we learned up through the Gigaspine, because like we said, I think the Gigaspine really was the culmination of what we learned about slashers, and it fit with that very well. And I think that the shows that we did, maybe Azurite and Pickle Combo more than Carousel, were iterating on it in interesting ways. And so from the first half, I think that it was very helpful to learn about the shape of the slasher in terms of the heat maps that we talked about when when the show becomes kind of just slasher versus the rest of them. I think that that was a bit different than the way that we've maybe done it before.
Yeah, I was fascinated by the degree to which so many of the slashers had really the final third being a one-on-one encounter, and none of our shows did we truly follow that structure. So that's still something to try in our duoprov world of like, what if there's just one person being chased by the slasher for the last 5 scenes? I don't know if we could do that.
It comes to mind like just iterating right now, like the whole like village as slasher is an interesting concept, and thinking about like staging a duoprov like this, it would make sense. Or yeah, one thing that comes to mind is having one person who just plays a protagonist and then one person who plays everybody else, and having something like a village as slasher structure to it uh, could be one way of achieving this one-on-one feel, where obviously like character wise it wouldn't be one-on-one, but it would probably feel like that just watching it.
Yeah, I agree. One person as always being the person who's slashing, and one person always being the person slashed. I think that's a good way to think about it. Yeah, I mean, I definitely big just learned what slashers are like by watching some of them. Despite, and I, pop my horror cherry or whatever. And it's still scary to me, but yeah, just the importance of doing research and how not very much research can really impact the show in a very positive way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you mentioned it for me, but I think both of us over this course were doing a lot of narration and probably thinking about that a lot. And it feels like a different kind of narration than like when I was doing maybe Hero's Journey somewhat recently. There's a lot of narration, but it's kind of moving the plot along. But this like color narration, this horror narration, it's an interesting and new thing to play with, and I had a lot of fun with it. But it definitely feels like a new skill sapling to water.
Yeah, it's a pandemic. I feel like taught us a lot of skills where we got better at playing in this sort of emotional, character-driven way because we didn't have our comedy in our bodies. But now this audio thing, which is similar, I think is giving us this big skill, and I'm interested to see how it can be reapplied into the visual world. Recently, I just saw Showstopper, which was phenomenal. At least the show that I went to was really, really good. And they have a director like guy on the side who's does some calling of this thing of just being able to say this starts to happen. That way, all the players know to come in and do that thing, which I found very good. Like at one point, there was a room full of mirrors, and he just was like, "We see the other improvisers all embody each of the mirrors." And like in our fun home, that would have been so cool in the fun house if there had been 7 improvisers on stage being all the reflections. And it just needs someone to coordinate that.
Yeah, I think director stands out because that was the original iteration. Actually, was with a director, and then like when we were doing it in person, then we didn't do directors after that. But yeah, the way that you describe it, I think, and especially coming off of all of the narration that we were doing and how important that was to painting the scenes. I think obviously in person, just physicalizing things is going to get you a lot of the way towards making the horror happen and making these grotesque things happen. But I do think that the words they're good. They're big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's good to actually be practicing it a lot. Because I think that each of us is now getting to the point where we'd feel pretty good about directing one of these, but it's a tricky role. And if done poorly, it will make your show worse. So just got to be careful.
I think something I came out thinking that I didn't go in thinking was that while we did have like a lot of like horror set pieces, and I think like Carousel was the best for like, oh, like that's kind of a scary moment that happened. I think that what we were maybe most successful with here was like some sort of unsettling feeling. I think maybe mostly I would say most in Pickle Combo, but there's like this meta unsettlingness that we I think definitely achieved by having the protagonists be the slashers, where you just feel like I don't know where the story is going necessarily, and that achieves some unsettlingness. And that maybe comes to mind as one of the ways in which improv might have to be different from these films, is that films are more formulaic, but as we described, they have like the visual gore, they have all these things, but maybe it is a bit of a necessary or just a very helpful thing for improv to have the form itself be a bit looser so as to achieve this feeling of not knowing where you're going next.
And taking advantage of the vibe. I feel like both of us achieved these sort of heights together where we were just like building our breath together like, and just getting more excited. And we weren't really questioning why we were following in that direction. I think that we just both were building off each other and getting more and more excited and trying to capture that ensemble energy in your show and just if there is this impulse, following its momentum fully is a big takeaway.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the progressive like learning and unlearning of specific things with the format. We in that show obviously had all the things in our bones of the classic slashers, but yeah, we didn't have to stick to it. And I'm sure knowing it, even though it didn't always come out, was helpful in informing the way that we set up the scenes and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a classic slash at all. There were only like 2 kills. So it's a different vibe. It's like you're saying, it's a horror. Oh, Julian, real quick. Which do you like better? Old slasher, movie slasher, or maybe this new sort of form break slasher?
I mean, I'm definitely like infatuated with this like form break slasher right now in a certain way because it feels new, it feels interesting, feels fun. I think I'm still I still was very into the slashers that I watched over this season, and I still have some degree of wanting to do like a cleaner plot version of something like Carousel, or wanting to do an actually improvised version of the comedy club show. So I put my coin into movie slasher.
Yeah, I think if I was going to practice more, I might practice more and more movie slashers, but I'm not really sure that I would actually want to perform that many of them. I definitely found myself growing bored by our first 2 shows. And I think that you want to hone your practice knife in this kind of repetitive, simple way, and then be able to throw that out the door when the show starts.
Like having watched these movie slashers, if I were to direct slasher again, there would be similar to the to my most recent direction of it. I think I would want some exploratory practice, and in particular, I would want to really like spend at least one full practice of like these duo scenes of, I don't know if it's like stage combat exactly, but 2 people being on stage with each other and like one person wanting to kill the other one. Like being like staging that and having that like physically be there, I think would be very interesting, and I am very interested to see how that could turn out. And I do really want to at some point try for that one-on-one long slasher versus final survivor thing.
Yeah, I'm excited for when we're in person next to be able to see what we can actually do physically. I'm a little nervous. One thing, another fully open thing, is that I edit the shows to make them a little shorter, because with Zoom, there's a tiny bit of lag in between each of our things. So I often just like literally between every line cut out like, eighth or maybe even like a 16th of a second of silence. So I do shave some time off the shows, but all of our shows without that time shaving ran over. Which again, it's fair. It's on Zoom. But I think that we do need to be more aware of the clock. And particularly, I would want to run a lot of platform scenes with timers. And we did that a ton in our Shakespeare shows. And I feel like it made us much better of like, you can do these platform scenes efficiently and energetically rather than this kind of slow drop into it.
I'm also interested in taking the movie slasher like structure like very faithfully and putting it onto very different settings, because it's both a very a very consistent structure that these movie slashers have, as well as in like the 80s and 90s ones, a pretty similar like a setting. So thinking of, because that alone in my mind might make it feel fresh in a big way, if it's just not happening to high schoolers basically.
Yeah, I think that the Jaws thing really was the one that got me wanting to do something in that style pretty badly. There's a lot more to unpack here. I really feel like I learned a lot about how to just in general with any movie, like do the research and make the heat maps. And I'm really curious to start doing that to more genres. And just this idea of like well-researched improv, like even this, we didn't even do a fraction of the amount of research that we could have done. and especially with the Shakespeare work that I'm doing, I'm watching more and more Shakespeare plays, and I think that that's really my next adventure and infatuation might just be very well researched improv.
Yeah, in the like study of improv, it feels like genre improv is like one of the dominant things you might do as a narrative improviser. And yeah, I do think that we made some progress in terms of thinking about how we do our genre research. I feel like there was a lot of times in college where we did a format, and maybe you and I or just you like did some greater degree of like outside of practice research on the thing that we're actually sort of doing, like the films that we're taking the genre of. But often I think that we were not very in touch with that. But as we've discussed, there's like pros and
Mm-hmm.
cons that we've seen here of being very in touch with the source material.
Yeah, in terms of that, I think that our biggest whiff was on film noir. I think that a huge percentage of the group had never seen a film noir
Mm-hmm.
by the end of it, and I think our biggest hit, also directed by Simran, was DCOM. Simran somehow
Yeah.
managed to get like 5 or 6 to maybe even 8 people in the group to watch like 4 DCOMs.
And there was so much more cultural knowledge about that. I'm sure most of us had watched something like that when we were younger.
And because of that, Disney Channel original movie, which I just thought that those shows were really good, despite being initially like, I'm not sure how this is going to go. The shows were just fucking phenomenal. So,
And I was thinking about this earlier, and this is nothing new. This has been with all of the genres that we've done, but I'm so grateful to the way that we do it in the sense that I feel like I've seen many, many, many a time just genre improv as almost being synonymous with parody improv. We're doing a parody of the thing, and we're riffing on all of the tropes, and we're making jokes about all the tropes. And whatever, maybe it's our Muprov, whatever, but I am just so like kind of tired of that, and in general think that it's not that interesting. And so I'm very, very glad for this orientation. And that in my mind is one of the most important things of doing genre improv in this way, is not thinking about it like a parody.
wonderful. Yeah, I think all these things will come forward with us in our future slashers. You have anything else that you think is exciting, or that you want to get into this sort of final episode?
I, one of the things that's been looming here that we've been talking about a lot is like the limitation of us doing it in this format of kind of Zoom prov, duo prov. But I think that this has kind of come out, but I just want to put a name to it, which is that it's actually been very helpful in retrospect, isolating these muscles. Like it's saying like you can't think about the physical, you can't think about this, you can't think about that. And while in the future, I think both of us really want to do this, in person on stage and all that kind of thing, this really like forced us to think about the things that only come through audio. And I think that alone has been very helpful in building those skills.
Yeah, I'm excited. If I was a person who hadn't listened to the rest of the season and I wanted to learn the maximal amount about Slasher, I would go back and I'd listen to Fear, Slasher 2. I would listen to Slasher 5, Reverse Engineering, Slasher 7, Gigaskeleton, and Slasher 10, Pickle Combo. I don't know if you have anything else that you would do, but I realized that I had one change for the season that I guess I'll have to add in for next season is that I think these debrief episodes would be nice if they offered almost a summary, kind of like a concluding
Yeah.
paragraph, which we failed this time, but for next time.
Yeah, we'll get them next time. And yeah, this is I think that the changes for this season are great, and that I do think that, as you just said, this would be very informative if somebody went through those episodes, but it was also very informative for us.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. All right. Well, we're about to go on some fun new adventures with some sort of one-off episodes, and then we're going to be diving into another format that's very near and dear to my heart. But in the meantime, thank you, Julian, so much for directing us through this wonderful series of episodes. And without further ado, this has been Muprov.
Musings. So my sign off is that I have been playing this video game over break that I think is really good. And I think that you don't have to like video games to even like it. It's called The Case of the Golden Idol. It's a mystery game, and it's a mystery game in a way that a lot of other quote unquote mystery games really aren't. Like the way that it works is you get access to like the moment that like someone died, and you're basically like going around the scene and you just pick out little details, and at the end there's a giant like Mad Lib style thing of like blank went to blank, and with blank use the blank to blank 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 blank, and you just have to fill in all of those details based on like different clues that you got. I doubt that we intersect super heavily with people who've played, I don't know, like Ace Attorney or the other like classic mystery games, but it really does break the form in a big way, and I think that it's super good.
The only mystery game I've played is Curious Village.
Curious Village. I don't know that one.
The Nintendo one where you're just solving puzzles the whole time.
Professor Layton.
Professor, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great mystery game in its own right, but yeah, maybe more puzzle focused. I like this is probably gonna be lost on many, but the broad difference in my head between puzzle and mystery games is that like puzzle games often have these hard solutions where it's like I mean hard as opposed to soft, not easy, in that there's like kind of a way to solve the puzzle. Whereas mystery games, while there is typically a way to solve the mystery, you have to make these softer judgments. Like in the case of the Golden Idol, there's various things where you can go into people's pockets and read their notes and see the way that they feel about people. And you have to make this like big judgment on like the set of 9 people about like the way that they feel about each other in order to deduce who like what the killer was. And it involves this like kind of social thinking in an interesting way. So
at the end of the game, do you get one guess as to who it is?
You have to fill in the big Mad Lib. So you basically do. You have to like get every detail of it right. That like Hal went to the store to buy the bowling ball, and then because of the bowling ball being too heavy, went back home, dropped it from their window, and then it fell onto the person.
Did you get it right?
Yeah. And it's great because all of the individual chapters are really good, as well as the like overarching mystery of it being really good. There was like a moment in the end where I'm like, oh, that's how it all connects. Oh my gosh.
This summer I did an escape room with Lana and Sebastian that was mystery themed. And they gave us all these like little fedoras, and like you look like a little detective person or a spy. And the other people in the escape room and Lana Sebastian were all solving the puzzles the whole time and really focused on it and not in character. And I spent the whole time just in character saying ridiculous things and bothering the person who was hosting the escape room and trying to do things that clearly were not part of it. But I was getting the same access to the clues as the other people because they were solving the puzzle. The escape room was not super clearly designed, so that even once you got all of the clues, it wasn't really clear who the murderer was. But it was set up so that if you did not guess correctly, you would die. And everyone took shots guessing, and then it came to me, and I launched in on a crazy Sherlock Holmes style spiel, like what you were saying, like this person did this person. And I was pretty confident in it. And the woman who was hosting the escape room seemed pretty surprised. And I think the reason that she was surprised is that none of the things I was saying were the correct reasons, but I did correctly identify the killer. So then there's this photograph now of Lana and Sebastian and all the other people who were there standing with a sign that was like, I died. And me with my dumb little hat standing with a sign that says, I survived. That was a really delightful and enjoyable improvisational experience.
That's very fun.
I got to use my puzzling to its maximum efficiency.
That's a total Mr. Bean moment.
A big success.
Before anything fades. I also got to give another recommendation. I know I don't think Al hates it, but Al's not on this page. But of just one of the best sodas that's dropped this year that I most recently tried, which is the Beetlejuice Fanta. The Haunted Apple, Beetlejuice, so Fanta. It's like a spiced apple soda, and it's honestly, if you think that you know sodas, this is a pretty different soda because it's a spiced soda. So, yeah, it's different. You should try it. It's really good. I think it's still in stores, but it might not be. So you might have to go on eBay to find it.
Yeah. Once we start getting sponsored, I might start editing that into the episode. But in general, I think if you want to make your soda pitches, you got to do the horrible thing you like to do, where you put them in right at the beginning of the episode, and we lose the listener.
It's the best soda that's dropped this year for sure. Oh, okay. I mean, there's also it is better than the Coke Zero plus Oreo that dropped. That's a novelty soda. I mean, it's good, but it's a novelty soda, whereas this is actually like a real, like, meal soda.
You goon.